In 2023 at QYO, we're really excited to be adding a new ensemble to our family of groups for the first time in many years. The success of our junior strings ensemble for over 30 years, led by Chen Yang, has led us to the decision to create a second junior strings ensemble in 2023. And we're delighted to announce that Cherie Deacon will be the conductor of this new ensemble. Cherie studied violin and viola at the Queensland Conservatorium of Music with Elizabeth Morgan and John Curro. During this time, she was also principal viola of the Queensland Youth Symphony, and she was a casual player with the Queensland Philharmonic Orchestra. She moved to Sydney with her husband, fellow violist David Deacon, when David took up a position in the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, and she taught at many schools and discovered her passion for teaching string instruments. When the family moved back to Brisbane in 2006, Cherie took up a position as lower strings coordinator at St Peter's Lutheran College, where she shares her passion for teaching string instruments with young kids. And we're absolutely delighted that Cherie will be bringing all that knowledge, that enthusiasm to QYO from 2023. Cherie, congratulations on the appointment to the position conducting JC2, and welcome to Conversations at QYO.
Thank you, I'm very excited.
So I want to go back to and talk a little bit about your family when you were growing up. Your maiden name is Jackson.
Yes,
and
indeed.
I knew of the Jackson family because my wife played violin in QIS in the 1990s, and even for a whole year sat next to her desk partner was your younger sister Paula Jackson, and they went on tour to Japan and Korea together. So obviously a talented family playing string instruments. Can you tell us a little bit about how you all discovered string playing?
Yes, certainly. So in actual fact, it stems back a little bit further because both of my parents actually went to the conservatorium. My dad played the piano and my mum sang and also played piano. And even further back than that, my grandmother was a notorious teacher in Toowoomba. Notorious, of piano. She was a pretty hard taskmaster.
She one of the ones rulers on the fingers.
You had to get it right. So my grandmother was probably the person that started all of this, I guess. And my first, I think we probably started very early on with the exposure to music.
Yeah. And did you all start on the piano then, if your parents were pianists?
No, my father said no to piano because he didn't want to come home after, spending all day teaching piano or whatever, to hear us to play the piano.
He wanted a bit of contrast.
Yeah, and also I think that he realised when he was at the conservatorium that piano was kind of a solitary instrument, and he looked at all his friends around and they were all joining QYO because that was back when it started.
Yeah.
And I think he even said that he tried to convince his parents to learn the double bass, because back then the double bass wasn't actually that hard to do, supposedly. My daughter would be absolutely mortified about that, seeing as she's a double bass player. But so that he could go on the tour with them. But of course that actually didn't happen.
No.
And so then he made it so that my sisters and I would be able to have that experience of playing in an orchestra with our peers, and thought, well, the violin is probably the best chance that they're going to be able to get into an orchestra and play
so there
on a tour.
There was always that sense that when you come to playing an instrument, there's a social element to playing in an orchestra that your parents
they missed out on.
Important.
Yeah. And that was a thing that they really wanted. I'm so grateful for that because we have had the best experience with QYO.
Yeah.
So.
And so you started on the violin and viola. Did you always play both?
So no, I started on the violin, and I actually started in QYO Junior String Ensemble. In 1987 with the conductor who was Monica Paulson back then, who was pretty tough and a little bit scary. And I remember travelling on the bus by myself when I was 10 to Ann Street. It was a bit of a dingy place. They had a lot of cartons stuck around the walls, I imagine obviously to absorb sound because it was not so great. And I was a bit scared, a bit nervous to go to my first rehearsal with never having actually experienced ensemble playing before. So I quickly realised that my sight reading level was well below par, and that was a massive learning curve, but one that I will treasure because, like, how could you not?
So you still remember what it feels like coming and playing in your first string ensemble?
Absolutely.
I mean, that must feel now
Yep.
you've come full circle, because every time you stand on the podium in front of a young group of string players,
Yeah.
you're essentially...
Doing what she did.
Yeah. My brother played in junior strings with Monica Paulson, and Matthew Gamer has spoken to me about it as well. She was famous for a bit of foot stomping, I
Oh,
believe.
not only foot stomping, but she would stop us if it wasn't good enough in the middle of a performance, and we were like,
Oh, wow.
yeah. I'm not that scary, but I love her because she was just so vibrant and energetic, and she would walk out. I remember this once. She walked out onto the stage with purple hair and the most beautiful gown you've ever seen, and I was like, I'm going to be her.
Oh, now's your chance.
Yep, isn't it?
And so did you, in playing the violin, was that a choice that you made? Did you go along to an orchestra concert
no.
and say...
So again, with my parents knowing that you need to start young to develop your skill, and you need to have that routine to get to a level where you can actually play and be of use to an orchestra in particular. They chose the instrument, which I'm grateful for. I think it was basically because they had a teacher at school. Her name was Therese O'Brien, who was this amazing person who excited us. And we were allowed to, start this fun thing, and it wasn't the piano. So no, I didn't choose the instrument, but kind of almost felt like it chose us. So
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So you were in junior strings, 1987.
Yep.
I read in your biography you were also principal viola in QYS. What
Yeah.
happened
So
between
what
junior
happened?
strings and
And
QYS?
getting there. Okay, so I spent 2 years in junior string ensemble. We actually played at Expo 88 on the River Stage,
Wow.
and I was like super excited to play there because I was a concert master as well at that point. And then I
Career
went
highlight.
very, very much so. And then I went to QYO 3 with Tor Frommier for the next year. And then my teacher, Elizabeth Morgan, said, why don't we try the viola? Because I think it might be more suited to you. Maybe I wasn't as great as I thought I was. And so I swapped to the viola later in that year, and I auditioned for QO2 and became principal viola of that ensemble for 2 years. Poor Chris Andrews, he had to put up with a lot. And I'll tell you about a little moment later on in my life about how, probably the worst moment of QIO, a little bit later, about the QIO2. But yeah, then I went to QIS, obviously.
Okay.
And
how many years were you in QYS?
in QIS, I was in there for 5 years, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, 5
And did
years.
you work your way from the back to the front of the section?
No,
or you...
I didn't work from the back to the front. I was always around about number 4, 3, 2, 1, that kind of thing. So I was lucky enough not to ever
I've got to ask,
sit.
is that where you met David? Was he...
Okay. So the year that I met David, I actually sat next to him. He was the QIO principal, and I sat next to him because another person had dropped out and I moved up. And at the end of that year, when we went away on the QIO Australian tour, that's where we got together.
Right.
But it took a whole year.
Okay, another QYO romance.
Yep, absolutely.
So what's your best memory
Best
of all
memory.
those QYO years?
Obviously the tours. They were the most fantastic thing because you get to know the people, and let's face it, the social experience of QIO is one of the best. You can't go past it, and I hope that that's what the kids actually find.
That's the glue, isn't it?
Yeah, it
That's
is.
kind of what binds people together.
Yeah, so I went on 2 QIO, well, back then it was called QIO1, sorry, but the QAS tours. I went on the Australian one in 1994, and then I went on the Korea Japan one with Maria in 1997.
Yeah.
And then I also went on a QIO2 regional tour, and that's, I think, what got me really enthusiastic.
Yeah.
Starting on that regional tour in QIO2 was just the most fantastic experience because we were billeted as well.
Do you remember where you
with
went?
families? No, I have no idea.
Yeah.
It was regional Queensland,
Yeah.
but no, not really. remember where. That wasn't the point.
No, that was the people you're with.
Yeah, that's all right. And we had a great time.
I say, worst QYO memory.
Worst QYO.
You hinted
So here we
that
go.
there's a story here.
So we were playing. Chris Andrews, the QYO2 conductor at that time, had handed everyone the London Symphony, Vaughan Williams, the Symphony No. 2 music. And
that's a big piece.
It is a very big piece. He was very ambitious, probably too ambitious actually. But so in the second movement, there's Viola Solo, and I was principal viola. I had zero hope of being able to play that from sight reading because the rhythm in it is a little bit tricky, and you had to play with the clarinet, who, by the way, was the most amazing clarinetist that I'd ever heard, ever. And me trying to play this solo, no way, not a chance in hell. Chris Andrews helped me so much, and I think he may have given me like a couple of chances, but it just wasn't going well. And also Chris Andrews' wife, Paula Stoffman, amazing viola player. Yeah. So he's probably very disappointed in me. So that was my worst moment.
Okay, so did you eventually play the solo, or were you taken off it?
You know what? I can't actually remember. I wasn't taken off it. I just maybe think that we didn't play it.
I see.
I'm not sure whether we actually did or not, because the worst memory stuck.
Probably just that first rehearsal.
It was.
Maybe you actually got there and performed it beautifully.
You should ask Stephen Baker. I think he would tell you otherwise.
Okay, we'll have to dig into that.
Yeah, don't.
All right, funniest memory.
Okay, funniest memory. Probably actually more embarrassing memory.
Okay, that also
because
works.
that kind of works, right? So my husband was QIS principal. He's a bit of a prankster. He likes to have a bit of fun with the rest of the section. So oftentimes he would fake lead. So that means that he would actually lead and not come in a place that you weren't supposed to come in. And a lot of the time, the players at the back who were constantly watching him would come in and he'd just snicker away and think that he was the funniest person on the planet. Anyway, unfortunately, we were playing Mahler 1, which in the fourth movement is a massive viola solo after a bit of a quiet section, and you have to count to get in because it's this slightly odd rhythm. And he faked lead, and I was sitting right next to him, and I ripped into it because, it's Mahler 1. And I was wrong. And it was like, everyone was burst out laughing, and my darling husband sat next to me, and I just thought, that's it. I learnt my lesson. Never again would I trust him to count. So I always quit.
So what was their method in the madness? Was he trying to teach the section to count for themselves?
Quite possibly, because that's always his thing. He wants people to think for themselves.
I mean, that's good. I had a moment in rehearsal recently where, I won't say which section, but we had a front desk of players who were totally asleep at the wheel.
Oh, no.
And the second desk were counting, and they led, and the section came in beautifully.
Yeah.
And for the whole next bar, the front desk just kind of
turned around and went, mate. Yeah.
Oh, I think we're supposed to be playing now.
Oh, no. Okay, yeah. Well, it happens.
Yeah, go count your bars rest.
Yep.
Wherever you are in the orchestra.
So
I always joke that the first violins are the worst at counting bars rest.
Oh, right. Well, because they don't have to.
Yeah,
they don't.
Playing most of the time.
Double basses are the best. So.
I'd like to talk a bit about your career as a teacher. When did you start teaching?
Okay, so I probably started teaching when I was at the Queensland Conservatorium as a student. Just had a couple of students. But I guess the real teaching for me started when I moved to Sydney in 1998. Because David had a position with the Sydney Symphony, and there weren't a lot of audition prospects.
Yeah.
So I was pretty lucky to get my foot in the door with a lady called Chris Belshaw, who's actually quite a well-known young person teacher, and she threw me in the deep end. I remember doing this funny off classroom teaching thing and actually being quite addicted to how exciting she was, and she was nuts. It was fantastic. But she really... at the time, she was also the Auster New South Wales president, so that's the Australian String Teachers Association president. And the New South Wales chapter at the time was hosting a national conference. And so she roped me in, and I got to see all this wonderful technique and different ideas about teaching young students particularly. At this conference, and that's what really got me started and motivated to think about my style of teaching.
You have a fabulous reputation for working with really young kids. What do you love about it, working with beginner string players?
The most exciting thing is that they're excited. They are always enthusiastic. You don't have to tell them to take their instrument home and practice, because that's the first thing they want to do. They want to show their mum and dad what they learnt that day, and they just have this enthusiasm, which is, I guess, kind of contagious.
Yeah.
And this eternal optimism that even if they make a bad sound, it's going to get better.
Yeah.
So for me, that kind of rubs off on my everyday kind of living, and it's kind of rewarding.
Is it also an excitement that, we all know that if you start learning and acquire bad habits, that's some of the biggest barriers to developing further and becoming a more accomplished player, that when you're really there at the beginning with them, that you can try and help them only create good habits, and shape their technique so that they can develop as quickly as possible?
I would like to think that, but even if you have the best teachers, you can still develop some odd habits. It is my job to remind them about, trying to fix those habits. But in the end, it's really about, my job is more getting them to be enthusiastic about playing and making a great sound and wanting to keep on going, as well as trying to encourage them to have good technique. So yeah.
What's the difference between teaching young kids one-on-one and conducting a large ensemble of young kids?
Okay, so one of the most important things about being a private teacher is that you want to get your students to be confident, and you want them to create a soloistic sound. And so when you go into an orchestra, it's not that at all. You have to learn how to blend your sound. You have to learn how to blend your intonation. You have to be in the same part of the bow as everyone else, because otherwise you'll stick out. So I guess the whole learning to be a little bit more aware of everyone else around you is probably one of the things I think is the most important thing to the difference between playing by yourself and with everyone else.
That teamwork aspect.
The teamwork.
It's not just about you and opening your ears.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, many people associate those early years of beginner string playing with some pretty excruciating noises.
Sure.
And I think every instrument has its challenges when you first start learning it. But string playing, it is a little bit like this, because you've got one hand doing this, another hand, and really sophisticated, complicated things that you have to learn and acquire total interdependence between left and right hand. Do you have any tricks for helping kids through those early stages?
Well, I think the most important thing is that you have to understand the child. Some kids come to you, they want to just play fast and they just scrub away. And then there are some kids that come to you and they're a little bit nervous. And so, you have to kind of work through that. And then, of course, there's those little confident bunnies that just want to show you what they can do. And I think the first thing that is the most important thing about transitioning from the excruciating noise to the beautiful sound is actually one of awareness, of actually understanding what a good and a bad sound is.
And being able to tell the difference
That's
to yourself.
Right.
Yep.
And so what I do to actually help that is I will play myself a really beautiful sound and then a really horrific sound. And I will get them to, so that it's totally over-exaggerated, I'll get them to say, which sound do you like better? And obviously, they will choose that good sound.
So then mimicking and having that sound in their ear as a goal. So how important is it for young kids to actually go to concerts, to listen to music, to listen to great players, to actually just have that sound in their heads that they're aiming for?
It's incredibly important. I mean, I think these days we're really, really lucky because we have those audio platforms like Spotify and YouTube. And those new ones, the digital concert hall since COVID, we've got those new things, but there's something about going to a concert. The atmosphere changes, you feel like you're just in this world that you can be transported to, the emotion that you can feel, surprise. I often find that that's the goosebump spot going to a concert, even like it's the same as going to a sporting event. You get those goosebumps that you just don't feel when you actually listen to it on the other platforms.
There's a crackle in the air.
There is, isn't it? And it's just so wonderful. So yes, it's very important.
I mean, people who haven't played in an orchestra, at our recent fundraising dinner, a friend of mine actually got up and had a go conducting the orchestra. And he said the one thing he wasn't expecting was to feel the vibration of sound through his feet. And I think the physicality of sound, when you're up close to an orchestra, it is like, it's like going to the beach and surfing, and I think all orchestral musicians, you can get a bit addicted to it because
I think that's why we keep coming back.
Yeah, it's such
even being in the audience
powerful
is so
experience.
Cool.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was listening to the Malatu last year, and I haven't quite felt like that in an audience since I played in QYO. Yeah. It was just magnetic. It was so fantastic.
I think there's also something special about young players playing that great repertoire for the first time. It's you're tackling these mountains, and there's an excitement, to getting to the top, and it's a pretty magnetic
I agree.
atmosphere. When you auditioned for the junior strings position, I was so impressed at how you were able to wrap up in a really fun and understandable package, technical information and musical information. And you could straight away hear a difference in the sound of the ensemble. Players sat up, straight backs, and within a minute or two, you'd change the sound that they were making. Do you think the players themselves are aware and able to recognise when they make that difference between that fuzzy sound, when people aren't quite in the right part of the bow, or not in the same part of the bow, not using the same articulation, not in tune? And then suddenly, when it starts to work, it's like a picture coming into focus. And it's so exciting when you're in a rehearsal and you hear that happening. Do you think the players at that young age have that awareness that they can recognise that?
Absolutely. They would have to. I mean, we all have, I think even from a young age, we all know what is good and what is bad. It's just innate in us. And I think that if you have the right person that's, has the right energy, that has the right delivery, they can get you to do anything. So, absolutely, they completely understand what's going on.
The other challenge I think you have working with an ensemble of young kids, in some ways I say to all the conductors at QYO, I have the easiest job because the QAS players are so amazing. They have a maturity, a technical ability, they can concentrate for long periods of time. I mean, when you've got a group of 7 to 11-year-olds, concentration's a thing too, right? How do you keep their attention?
It's kind of fun. They have to have fun. You can't be a person who is an army sergeant. You can't run your orchestra like that. They're not going to come back if you do. So some of the things that I mean, when you start to see them wiggle, they have to get up. So, I actually make them stand and play, or I make them put their instruments down and we stretch. And as string players, and I'm not sure if you know this, but as string players, we have a lot of back and arm issues and things. And so learning about our bodies from very young, I think is really important. So I will get them to have, I guess, what I call a brain break, but it's also more of a physical movement break.
Yeah, so they don't build tension.
Absolutely. So I think that's probably a big thing. And then, of course, there's the way you use your voice. If you have high energy, they're going to mimic what you do. And if you, sometimes I even whisper to try and get their attention. It's a cool trick. It actually works remarkably well. Probably just once in the rehearsal though. And then I probably I like to compare the sections. So we might have competitions. They love doing that kinds of things. You may make the first violins play something and then get the second violins to do it, and then the other parts of the orchestra judge that, and that's, getting their focus back in.
Yeah.
I like telling stories, like getting them to tell me stories about what it's like, what's the mood like. So their involvement, I think, is really, really important. And then probably the last thing that makes sure that they have the concentration, I think, is probably knowing their names. And obviously that takes a while because there's quite a lot of them. But if you know who they are, particularly the right at the back, they're more likely to go, oh, she knows my name. She thinks I'm important. And they are. Yeah. Every single person in that orchestra is just as important. Doesn't matter where they sit. And I want them to know that. And then they'll perform,
That's
I think,
true.
Better.
That's something that I am still working on. I set myself a challenge this year of knowing every player's name in QYS. And I said, you can come up to me at any stage and ask me if I know your name, and if I don't, you get a lolly snake.
Oh, fantastic.
So I've been handing out a few lolly snakes,
well.
I have to admit, this year.
Yeah,
but,
you've got a massive orchestra.
No, but you're so right. Because everybody in an orchestra is contributing.
Yeah, it's
and
a
if
team.
anybody has the feeling that they're not important, they will just coast along. But I think if you hear it when every player is 100% committed.
Yeah. And you can see it because they move. Yeah. And movement, which is so underrated, is so important in an orchestra, even though they're sitting in chairs and they're restricted. So that's also something that I like to do. Get them to over-exaggerate their movement, and then we, come back. But that's my goal for JSE, probably.
Fantastic. And what about repertoire? Like, how do you start? What's your process for deciding what repertoire to choose?
So it's very clear that young children do not like playing slowly, even though it's probably the best way to help them to develop a sound that you really want. So I will always choose maybe one or two simple and slow pieces to try and create that sound, try and get that type of sound. And then the other pieces that I choose will be fast, quite rhythmic, or maybe hummable, so that they can sing it. That's pretty much the way that I go about choosing repertoire for an age group that young.
Yep, so a bit of a mixture.
Yeah.
What do you hope to teach the kids in JSE? You've spoken about this already, but if you really had to boil it down, when they leave JSE 2 and perhaps go into JSE 1 or into QYO 3, what skills do you hope they'll have learnt with you that they then take with them? Well,
kids are notorious, I think, for not thinking before they play, which is fine because they just want to play. It's so much fun to play. But I want to be able to get them to think about what they're playing and how they're doing that, and why it's important that everyone has to have the same bowing. And so I guess along with having fun, I want to be able to impart some knowledge that they might be able to take further on with them.
So that's the skill set that they'll take with them.
Yeah.
Some of those players may go on and choose a life in music.
True.
Some of those players may choose another path. When they look back at their time in QYO and have a conversation like this saying, I remember that first ensemble JSE 2 with Mrs. Deacon, what do you hope that they will remember, 20, 30 years from now about their time with you?
I actually just hope they remember they had fun. Music is about being, human. It's about the whole thing is, the whole experience is about being able to play with other people, being able to show that you're worth something. I mean, music really does give us that kind of sense of worth, doesn't it? And accomplishment and, fun.
Cherie, thanks so much for coming and talking to me today, and can't wait to hear the results of you working with JSE 2 next year.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Cherie.